Well, we talked a fair bit about this Course in Miracles. We've actually said nothing about what it is, and I think what also is interesting about it is that, in my understanding of it, you talked when you were a child that you had this rejection of religion and this rejection of kind of those kind of terms, and yet there's quite a lot of that used in A Course in Miracles. So I'm curious as to a bit about how A Course in Miracles came about, what it is, and your journey with opening up to that.
It's a very powerful story, actually, how it came about. You want me to
I'm curious briefly the backstory behind it.
All right. Well, it's a channeled book. It's channeled material, and the woman it was channeled through, her name was Helen Schuckman, and she was an academic clinical psychologist.
Right.
Working in
just the kind of thing that psychologists do, sit there and channel
books. Exactly. She was working in a hospital in New York City in the 1950s and 60s, and she was working with this guy called William Thetford, and they had a very difficult working relationship. They were always fighting, never agreeing on anything. And one day, they were just about to go to a meeting, I think, and Bill said to Helen, there must be a better way of us relating. And Helen agreed with him. For the first time ever, she'd agreed with anything he'd said. And she said, and I'm going to help, I'm determined to help you find it. Now I see the parallel between that and my walking through St James's Park with my friends, saying there must be something more than this, there must be a better way. Without wishing to sound too grandiose, I'd see that parallel. Anyway, so as a result of that decision that they made, these two, Helen started, hearing an inner voice to start with. There were visions she had prior to that, but the most important thing was the inner voice she heard. And because she was an academic clinical psychologist, she thought she was going crazy.
So I guess didn't tell any of her colleagues about this, the voices she started hearing.
Well, she only told Bill that she kept the whole thing a deadly secret for years, really until her death. It wasn't publicly known anyway. She told a sort of select circle. Anyway, initially the only person she told was Bill, and he said, "Well, why don't you just do what it says?" It was saying, "This is A Course in Miracles. Please take notes." This was the first couple of lines that came through, and he said, "Why don't you just do what it says, write it down, and if it's nonsense, we'll just chuck it away." And
nothing else, shut the voice up and do what it says. I guess.
Yeah. And if if it makes sense, we'll then decide what we're going to do. So that was the beginning of a process that took her 7.5 years, and it obviously did make sense. She was incredibly resistant to the whole process all the way through. So that actually gives me a great deal of respect for the Course, that it came through. Not because of her, but despite her. She says that evening times are a favourite time for the material to come through, and she says, she's written this up in a biography, that she resented this imposition incredibly and would sometimes go to bed without writing anything, but she couldn't sleep and she had to get up and write as directed, and only then could she go,
Well, imagine what it's like, you're sitting there watching EastEnders and then comes this voice asks you to write things down.
And it could be at any time. She could be, she was not in any kind of altered state or trance or anything. Okay. She could break off at any time. She could go to a meeting. She could, she had to go on a journey or something. Answer the phone, and it would just pick up from where it left off.
And I think also, the thing that's interesting about it is that, I think some people have kind of questions around channel stuff and what does it mean, and I think what's been helpful for me around it is that it doesn't really matter where it's come from, if it's come from her deeper intuition, from channeled from somewhere else. I think what's important is it helpful? And is it helpful in someone's life? And as you're obviously talked about so far already, helpful in your life, and for it to have been used by millions of people, obviously it's been helpful for other people as well. So that there was this book that came out, and you mentioned about there's quite a lot of usage of Christian terms and that kind of thing, and that you were resistant to that, and also that she was resistant to that when she was writing it. Yeah. But I think I also find it personally quite interesting that it's almost like if we can have a relationship to, for want of a better term, God or the universe or something bigger than us. Maybe it's a less controversial way of putting it. It can be a first-person sense of that inside of us. It can be a second-person sense of dialoguing with it in some way, or it can be more like a third-person sense of being everywhere, all around us. And I think, as you talked about in your experience, I think it's true for a lot of people that the traditional use in religion of this God being someone you talk to and wants to punish you and send you to hell if you don't, tidy your bedroom or whatever, which we're told as kids. That I think there's something very interesting, and it's been true of some other books in some ways as well, that it opens up that possibility of asking for help to something other than ourselves, and actually taking our ego or our sense of ourselves a bit out of the equation and opening up that relationship again.
Right.
And I'm curious if that was also true for you, if it helped you develop a connection again to some kind of guidance beyond just kind of science and that kind of way of looking at things.
Yeah. Well, definitely. There's awful lot in what you just said. You have to start with, it doesn't matter whether you believe that this book came from Jesus, or you don't that you believe in God or the Holy Spirit or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, the Course says if you apply the ideas, then you'll then have the experience, and that's all that's really necessary. It doesn't really matter who wrote how the book came, where it came from, or anything. And there's that. For me, when I read the words in that book, there's a deeper experience of it being true.
Yes.
It goes beyond my rational mind. I mean, it's an extraordinary experience reading the Course sometimes, because my rational mind doesn't get it very often. I might read a paragraph and it's just like my rational mind's just tied in a knot. But I've had an experience. It's like a visceral experience of it being true. I know something's happened in well, it's not actually in my body, I don't think, but in my subconscious.
Yeah.
Something's gone on, and something's been like part of that thought system in my subconscious being rewired, or something. Something's changed.
I understand.
Yeah.
And there's a sense that there's some kind of guidance or some kind of support beyond just self.
Yes.
And I think that's very isolating for a lot of people, the sense that it's basically just them.
Right. Well, there has to be something from outside us. I mean, who are we? I mean, as the Jews say, apparently, we just chop liver. There has to be something
Just
more.
primates.
I forgot the point.
Yeah, my kind of question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. There has to be something outside the ego thought system. Because the ego thought system of us being chopped liver, being an individual isolated from the rest of the world, from other people, and from spirit, it's the ego that got us into trouble in the first place.
Right.
So we need help from outside that thought system to correct it. So it's not just a question of me saying, okay, I've got to change my mind. Yes, I do, but I do that by getting help from outside. And in a sense, it's spirit that changes my thought system, my thoughts. I've got to make that initial decision. As of course, says all we need is a little willingness. All that's required is a little willingness. So as long as we have that, then that change can come about.